Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're opening up a fascinating, highly classified conceptual briefing to totally deconstruct the anatomy of global debt trap diplomacy. If you've ever found yourself wondering how modern geopolitical empires are built, without firing a single shot, well, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to impartially map out exactly how sovereign wealth gets extracted on just a massive scale. It's like a giant puzzle, and we've got some truly eye-opening diagrams to help us put it together. All right, let's dive right into this. So our source material today is the Confessions of an Economic Hitman dossier. We'll be looking at a really thorough, updated analysis of the global strategies used by both the United States and the People's Republic of China, stretching all the way from the 1960s right up to the present day. And I want to be super clear here. Our goal is definitely not to take geopolitical sides. Instead, we're going to objectively analyze the underlying mechanics of what the author calls the death economy. We basically just want to see how the math actually works behind the scenes. To instantly establish the core mandate of an economic hitman or an EHM, just listen to this incredible claim straight from the text. Quote, highly paid professionals who cheat countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars, funneling money from the World Bank into the coffers of huge corporations. I mean, wow, it's a remarkably bold claim for sure, but it perfectly sets the stage for the strategic playbook we are about to unpack. Okay, here's our quick roadmap for today's briefing. We'll start with the EHM mandate, then look at the GNP illusion, debt trap mechanics, the three waves of expansion, the superpower playbook, and finally, the overarching anatomy of the death economy. Keep this structure in mind as we roll through the content. Starting us off with Section 1, the EHM mandate, the foundation of wealth extraction. The entire heavy architecture of political subjugation and wealth extraction essentially rests on two massive pillars. On one side, you have fear, which historically meant military intimidation or the very real threat of a coup, but on the other side, you have debt. The dossier strongly emphasizes that debt has actually become the primary structural weapon of the modern era. We're talking about completely insurmountable financial obligations that are secured by a nation's own sovereign resources. To fully grasp how this operates, we really need to look at all four pillars of the strategy working together: fear, debt, insufficiency, and divide and conquer. Insufficiency is particularly insidious. It exploits a developing nation's deep anxiety over poverty and their desperate, totally understandable desire for modern infrastructure. Then, divide and conquer is that classic, age-old tactic of pitting internal factions or even entirely different nations against each other. Together, these form the ultimate psychological and financial weapons used to essentially corner target nations. Moving right along to Section 2, the GNP illusion. Let's look at the mathematical facade. So you might be wondering, how on earth is this massive wealth extraction justified to the general public? Well, on the surface, everything looks great. A healthy 3% average gross national product growth suggests a country's prospering, right? It makes it look like these huge infrastructure loans are lifting everyone out of poverty. But when you really zoom in and look at the diverging trends beneath that surface-level data, the stark truth of who actually profits is revealed. This is the crucial point, the stark contrast between perception and reality. The top elites, we're talking about the owners of local monopolies and franchised industries, they see massive booming gains, sometimes up to 10%. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% of the population actually loses wealth. Why does that happen? Well, because vital public funds are literally diverted away from health and education just to service that massive foreign debt, which leads to crippling austerity measures. The broad growth statistics are fundamentally deliberately skewed. All right, Section 3, debt trap mechanics. Let's dig into the operational blueprint. There is a massive warning sign built into this entire dynamic, and it's called the capital bypass. Honestly, this is the absolute most vital mechanism to understand today. The loan money practically never leaves the higher income lending nation. It is transferred directly from banking offices straight to domestic engineering and construction firms. The debtor nation gets the infrastructure, sure, but they never actually hold the capital. It just loops right back around. Let's break down this cyclical process step by step. Step 1, identification. A higher income nation identifies a target country that has unexploited resources, like oil, for example, but lacks the capital to extract it. Step 2, the loan. Massive loans are approved, but they're based on deliberately wildly inflated economic forecasts. Step 3, the extraction. As we just saw, the capital bypasses the debtor nation entirely, going straight into the pockets of foreign corporations. And finally, step 4, the default. Shackled by insurmountable principal and interest, the debtor inevitably defaults, which forces them to hand over control of their resources or their geopolitical loyalty just to settle the bill. Next up is Section 4, the three waves of expansion. We're looking at the chronological evolution here. So, how has this playbook actually evolved on the global stage? Over the last few decades, the dossier tracks a very distinct shift in tactics, transitioning away from a model dominated heavily by the United States toward a modern-day approach that is being heavily utilized by China. The sources divide this history up into three specific eras. Era 1, running from the 1960s to 2001, was the first wave. This was driven primarily by the US using debt and anti-communism as their main levers. Era 2, from 2001 to the present, saw the US shift toward militarization and domestic deregulation in the post-9/11 world. But Era 3, which started around 2013, represents the third wave, the awakening of the Chinese dragon. Their primary lever? Massive infrastructure and trade connectivity through the New Silk Road Initiative. Which brings us to Section 5, the Superpower Playbook. Let's check out the diagnostic matrix. We are going to neutrally analyze and compare the differing methods employed by Washington during Waves 1 and 2 against Beijing's methods during Wave 3, looking across four key dimensions. Let's see how this builds our understanding of their contrasting strategies. The U.S. model traditionally demands submission to neoliberal policies, things like complex conditionalities, privatization, and strict austerity programs. China's model, on the other hand, pitches non-interference, basically saying, hey, we won't meddle in your local government. However, the hidden hook here is that this massive Chinese debt is directly collateralized by raw physical resources. If you default, they take the oil, or they take the minerals. It's a very direct exchange. To really ground these abstract theories, the dossier presents a real-world warning. Ecuador, in 2016. It's a classic canary in the coal mine. China issued $19 billion in loans to basically bail Ecuador out of their defaults. But in exchange, they claimed 80% of Ecuador's oil as payment. And the physical outcomes of the infrastructure projects? Absolutely catastrophic. We're talking about the Coca-Codo-Sinclair Dam, which is riddled with thousands of cracks and shorted out the national grid. Or the Mirador mine, which featured precarious, toxic tailings dams built right in a high earthquake zone. It perfectly illustrates the severe, tangible risks of resource annexation upon default. And finally, Section 6, the anatomy of the death economy, synthesizing systemic exploitation. When we zoom out and synthesize the overarching systemic impact we've explored throughout this explainer, the math of the entire operation becomes vividly, almost painfully clear. Natural resources and raw materials are poured into the top of the system. The byproduct that gets spun out into the world is societal debt, massive inequality, and environmental degradation. And what drips out of the very bottom of this funnel? Highly concentrated elite wealth. So the absolute most crucial point the dossier makes is this. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed. Whether it is being orchestrated by Washington in the West or Beijing in the East, the underlying mathematical and geopolitical model of exploitation is identical. The rhetoric changes, sure, but the math remains exactly the same. Now, thankfully, the source material doesn't just leave us with the problem. It actually defines an alternative. It calls for a massive transition to what it terms a life economy. This is defined as a regenerative system, one that maximizes long-term benefits for people and for nature, rather than focusing solely on short-term materialistic consumption and profit at literally any social or environmental cost. It's a fundamental paradigm shift. Which brings us to our final thought, and a pretty provocative question to leave you with today. Systemic inertia is incredibly powerful, isn't it? We so often cling to systems that are actively failing us just because it's what we know. Having deconstructed the very clear, highly intentional mechanics of global debt trap diplomacy, how can we break this cycle and transition from a death economy to a life economy? It is a massive, incredibly complex challenge, but deeply understanding the playbook, just as we've done in this explainer today, is the absolutely essential first step. Thank you so much for learning with me.